Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the MS-20 Mini from Korg. This is a reissue of the classic MS-20 synthesizer from back in the day. It's an analog, subtractive, monophonic synthesizer with semi-modular sort of setup. You can everything sort of normalized together, but you can patch via this little patch bay. It's exactly the same in every way, certainly where components allow, but all the key analog electronic circuitry has actually been built again by Korg in this 86% scale version of the synthesizer. The only other major difference is that it's got the addition of a USB and a MIDI port to allow sort of hooking up to external DAWs. Let's take a look at it. So here it is. It's got a 3-octave, not mini keys, they're sort of somewhere in between. They're quite thin and long, no velocity or aftertouch, just basic MIDI functionality here. We've got the pitch and the momentary button here for extra control, but these aren't ordinarily mapped to anything. As ever with the MS-20, you've got to patch them to the destination of your choice. Here, in fact, is the patch bay. You can see what we've got is mini jack patches, all exactly the same as on the MS-20 Mini. These are quite solid. What they've done is they've actually created like a collar around the surface mount jack. So these aren't actually bolts like on the original. And then coming on to the main control panel, been asking about construction quality, and there is no doubt there is a bit of wobble here. Controls are identical to the MS-20. We've got the high pass and the low pass filter, fully resonant, dead separate here. 2 envelopes, envelope 1 and envelope 2, LFO, frequency modulation, 2 VCOs with multi-waves, slightly different. This one's got pink noise, this one's got ring, and the pulse width modulation for the pulse width knob here, and footage controls. So this one goes from 32 to 4, 16 to 2, portamento, master tune, all the things that you would expect from a perfect replica. The only real difference, as I said, is the fact that we've got around the back, we've got USB input and a MIDI in. DC 9 volts, so you can't actually power it from USB, but what this does allow is MIDI input to the synthesizer engine and MIDI output to an external, you know, DAW or whatever. There is no CV, as you've been asking. Does this, you know, for instance, if we were to patch something into the signal in and have CV out, or send CV out from the oscillators out to MIDI, no, it does not do that. It's a very basic MIDI implementation. So build quality is pretty solid. The case is solid, the jack field is solid, but the knobs are definitely got a bit of wibble for them. And if you like to put your hand on top of the case and sort of roll them with your thumb, like I do on the MS-20, that's not really going to happen because there's just a bit too much give in them, as far as I can tell. So one major improvement over the original is it comes with 10 patch cords. I guess these are about 40, 50 centimeters, well, maybe 30 centimeters long. And the original only came with 3, so you get a whole lot more patchability right out of the box. So nice one, Korg, for actually not skimping on something that they could have. That's not really my intention to review every single aspect of the synthesizer, merely to try and get you a kind of idea of how close it is to the original. If you want to see what all the individual bits do, I suggest you check out Mark Doty's excellent series on the MS-20 Mini, where he goes over each individual sort of element of the synthesizer in great depth. We'll start off with just a regular sawtooth. Come down to the triangle, nice and subby for a bit of extra woof. And then the pulse width wave, square stroke pulse width, full square, variable to narrow. This actually does bring up one thing. The original had no possibility to modulate the pulse width, which is kind of like, it's one of my favourite modulation sources. And unfortunately, they haven't fixed that in this version, so you still get an original shortcoming too, in my opinion. But apparently there are some mods that could be done to the original MS-20 that may possibly, if you get your under the hood, may possibly be able to do the same thing, because essentially the same pretty much the same analog components exist underneath the hood of this. Right, so let's bring in the second oscillator. And one of those that's got a very cool feature is the ability for ring mod. Which gives some great bell-like and distorted tones when you combine it with the filter. Good time to bring up the filter. Right, let's take a listen to a sweep. That's the low pass filter, high pass filter. Nice thing is you've got independent resonance control, so let's really crank the resonance on the high pass, and you get on the low pass, sorry, and you get this nice resonant creamy sound. But quite underused actually, I think, was the peak on the high pass filter. So you get that resonate. You get a sort of really beautiful harmonic kind of seesaw effect. So one of the questions that's come up loads is, what does it sound like compared to an original MS-20? Well, fortunately, I have an original MS-20, so I can put them side by side. I've got them set up here just on a sawtooth. Let's take a listen. Original. Sound pretty good. Let's take a look at the oscilloscope. Original, Mini. You can see there is a bit of a difference there. More of a spike. More pronounced there. Triangle wave. You can see that they're very similar. There's a slightly sharper scoop at the bottom of the wave on the Mini. And lastly, we'll go into pulse width. And you can see there's quite a difference there. Audibly, it's not that massive, but you know, it's not an exact carbon copy, I think it's fair to say. So let's take a listen to the filters. Go to a sawtooth on G. Same on here. Back again. So they're pretty close. I mean, you're going to get some difference. Bear in mind, this thing is, 30 plus years old, and this is probably a matter of weeks or months. So, they're both analog, so the components are much, much older in here. So an exact match is probably asking a bit too much. What I can do though is hook them both together and create a sort of dual MS-20 too. We've got the CV in gate just coming out, going directly into the CV gate of the MS-20. You can hear, while it's in tune here, it's not here. The tracking is slightly out. Now, I don't know whether that's due to the age of the original MS or whether it's down to the calibration of the Mini. I suspect it's probably down to the age of the MS-20. Anyway, more fun. Now, if I take the pitch wheel output and plug that into the cutoff frequency, I can do some more modular madness. All great fun. Incidentally, there were some questions about whether the knobs on the front of the MS-20 Mini output any control data over MIDI. The answer is no. All it outputs is note on and note off. No velocity, nothing. It's very basic. So let's have a look at the operation with external modular equipment as well. So I've set up my monorocket case with the various Doepfer and Pittsburg modular modules in it. I've got a fancy little transition so you can see a bit more. So here's an oscillator. Now let's bring in a Pittsburg modular oscillator, which is this one at the top, tuned to a 5th. I'll just turn this down. Now that's actually not working in the same way. That's because the MS-20 Mini works in a volt or hertz per volt format, which is why it works with the other MS-20, and the Eurorack stuff works in a volt per octave. So somebody really needs to come out with a converter quick that goes either in a Eurorack or as a standalone thing, because they're going to sell probably loads of these MS-20 Minis, but we're not going to be able to hook them up to modular, so that would be a really good idea if somebody could do that. So let's add some more things. So now I'm going to bring up the second oscillator of the MS. I'm going to bring up the generator, which is another Pittsburg modular. Which is a kind of chunky waveform. And now I've got the LFO out of the A115 Mini Voice synthesizer coming into the cutoff frequency modulation of the high pass filter. So now, if I bring... got this tuned into sort of quite high audio rate. And not only that, I've also got the pink noise coming out of the patch bay here, back into an audio mixer, which is again coming back into the external input. So tons of modular fun to be had there. I mean, I can get all the control, I/O, you know, as with all of these, you can just get lost in it. The only thing we do need, obviously, is, like I said, a format converter so that I can play from the keyboard the oscillators and they will have a meaningful pitch relationship to what's going on in the MS-20 Mini. So it's down to the final roundup, and really Korg have to be commended for bringing the MS-20 back to life. It's something that, you know, Japanese companies are not noted for doing, which is kind of just going back and back and back and sort of harvesting their back catalogue in such a precise manner. I mean, obviously we've seen people using the names, but not actually just resurrecting hardware lock, stock and barrel. And that's something impressive, and something that only really has been allowed by the fact that Korg have been making little monotrons and MIDI monotribes up to now. So they've got this manufacture process, and good luck to them, because to make something of this analogness for the price, which is around about 500 quid, is a pretty fabulous thing in this day and age, as far as I'm concerned. Now, there are disadvantages, and these disadvantages are really down to the disadvantages of the original keyboard. So, for instance, no pulse width modulation, no access to individual modulation on oscillators, various different foibles. But remember, this was built as a budget synthesizer back in the day. It's only now, really, that it's become fantastically expensive and sought after because of the character of the sound. So it's really down to whether or not you want the MS-20 sound. And sure, you can get it with the Legacy collection, but it's not the same thing as having a standalone analog synthesizer and all that it entails. I mean, obviously, the only other downside really is the fact that it won't interface directly with other analog gear in terms of pitch to voltage, you know, CV and gate. You're going to have to get that adapter. I think Harvestman do something called English Tier, which is a Eurorack module, but again, you'll have to put that in a rack. You know, it's added expense. So that's a shame they didn't bring something out, or maybe they are going to bring a little box out that would be nice and cheap for people to accessorize. It's about 500 quid in the UK. Other currencies will scroll below. Still hard to come by. I mean, these things obviously take a bit more manufacture than just your regular kind of stamped out synthesizer. But ultimately, you know, you're getting a true analog beast here. I mean, you do have alternatives. You've also got the Arturia Mini Brute, which is right in the same pocket and arguably does have better interfacing options, but it's not an MS-20. This is an MS-20, and to all intents and purposes, that's what you're getting. I mean, sure, the build quality is a little bit less robust. I mean, the knobs can be a bit wobbly, but for this kind of price, you're not going to get a tank. All I can say is, if you want the MS-20 sound, this is what you need, unless of course you want to spend a couple of grand on an original, and it sounds pretty much the same anyway.